That the revised GST regime is beneficial to the consumer is somewhat known, but the question now is it finally the turn of the small car segment to shine after years of muted performance? And in this week's episode, we bring you some insight into a potential standoff between two parts of the auto industry. Hello and welcome back to Business Matters at the Hindu with me, K. Bharat Kumar. October this year saw car makers achieve record sales, helped along by a sales push during the festive season, as well as a revised GST, or the Goods and Services Tax regime, which now subjects small cars to 18% tax versus a 29 to 31% tax earlier. For context, August sales were definitely poorer and September was muted at best. The chart on your screen shows the movement to positive territory for most car makers over the past 3 months. Maruti, Tata Motors and Mahindra achieved double-digit sales for October 2025 compared to the same month last year. Maruti, on a high base compared to the rest, achieved slightly in excess of 10% growth, while Tata Motors touched 27% and M&M 31%. Significantly, sales of Maruti's mini cars such as the Alto and the Espresso contracted 15% in October compared to the same month in the previous year. But other models from the company's stable, which would be eligible for the lower GST rate such as Swift, Desire, Ignis, Celerio, Baleno and Wagonar together notched up a 15.5% growth in October 2025. Late last week, Maruti chairman R.C. Bhargav told news agency Reuters that it is likely that cars eligible for the lower GST rate of 18% would likely outpace the growth of cars that fall in the 40% tax category. He also pointed out that 70% of Maruti's production fell in the lower tax bracket. Now, companies such as Maruti and likely other car makers would be watching these small car sales numbers like a hawk in the coming months, because depending on how the numbers stack up, they apparently, as reported in sections of the media, are ready to change the lineup of their launches, tending more towards small vehicles than large SUVs. Says Aarti Roy, Associate Director of Care Edge Ratings. This could help revive a segment that has lost ground to SUVs since FY19. For the Indian market, this is positive. Smaller cars are easier on the roads, safer in traffic and more fuel efficient. Encouraging compact cars over heavy SUVs aligns with our infrastructure realities and sustainability goals. Carriage says that it expects a revival of the small car segment over the next 2 to 3 years, particularly in urban and tier 2 markets. Another reason for optimism for the small car segment is that the GST rate revision will be followed by the mandating of revised norms that have been put out by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. These norms offer an extra carbon dioxide deduction for cars that fall in the sub 4 meter segment. This is happening for the first time. So, Ms. Roy of Carriage points out that OEMs, or original equipment manufacturers or car makers, now have a twofold reason, a regulatory as well as a tax-driven reason to start refreshing their portfolio of compact cars. And here lies the nub of a spat that is brewing in the industry, aligning electric vehicle makers on the one side and those that make strong hybrid vehicles and flex fuel vehicles on the other. The BEE, or the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, has proposed draft norms titled CAFE 3 and CAFE 4 that will be mandated for 5 years starting FY27 and for another 5 years starting FY32 respectively. The electric vehicle industry claims that some of the proposals have been diluted in the September 2025 draft compared with that from June 2024, putting the EV ecosystem at a disadvantage. Now, what is a flex fuel vehicle? Such a vehicle is defined as one that runs on petrol but mixed with ethanol, up to 85% ethanol. And a strong hybrid is one that combines a petrol engine with an electric motor, such that for specific distances, electric power takes over the running of the machine, and the battery is recharged by regenerative braking as well as a petrol engine. And this combination significantly drives up the mileage. Now, two things stand out in the revised BE norms. One, as discussed, small cars tend to get a leg up. Second, easier compliance norms and extra emission deductions allowed for flex fuel vehicles and strong hybrids tends to place the EV ecosystem, the electric vehicle ecosystem, at a disadvantage. We spoke to three analyst organizations, Carriage, Crisil Ratings, and ICRA, and after processing all the information and opinions expressed by analysts, we get the impression that the government is indeed following a balanced approach, looking at the short term by encouraging strong hybrids. But they also point out, the analysts point out, that the government ought to help develop or at least incentivize the development of infrastructure for the electric vehicle ecosystem, failing which we as a nation will not meet our long-term emission targets. As per the upcoming Corporate Average Fuel Efficiency or CAFE 3 framework for passenger vehicles, a new category for small cars has been introduced for the first time. Vehicles with an unladen mass of up to 909 kg, engine capacity of up to 1200 cc, and a length of up to 4 meters are eligible for an additional 3 grams per kilometer carbon dioxide reduction up to a maximum of 9 grams per kilometer per reporting period. Poonam Upadhyay, Director Crisil Ratings, points out that the revised BE norms also bring in something called the CNF or the carbon neutrality factor, which is put out to encourage cleaner fuels and hybrid technologies. She points out that if these draft norms are adopted, it would formally recognize alternative fuels as well as hybrid powertrains as a transitional option in decarbonization, even while we wait for EV adoption and charging infrastructure to become more widespread. This, she says, could encourage car makers that are already invested in CNG or ethanol powered or hybrid variants to start scaling up such technologies as part of their compliance strategy. Rohan Kanwar Gupta, Vice President and Sector Head Corporate Ratings at ICRA, points out that the volume derogation factor in the revised norms has been retained at 3 for EVs and 2 for strong hybrids. This is a revision from the June 2024 draft proposal of 4 for EVs and 1.2 for strong hybrids respectively, indicating what he calls a more balanced approach between supporting EVs and hybrids. The VDF or the volume derogation factor is a multiplier that allows companies to count one vehicle unit as more than one depending on its emission performance. So EVs, as per the June 2024 draft, EVs were to get a VDF of 4 while hybrids were to get a VDF of only 1.2. But now the revised draft for September 2025 has retained the VDF for EVs at 3 and for hybrids at 2, which means the gap is narrower. So if it were 4 for EVs and 1.2 for hybrids, it would be a spur, an encouragement to EV makers. Now, the revised norms have irked electric vehicle makers because they feel they are pitted against competition that needs to invest far less but still get to earn emission deductions. Mr. Gupta says that this approach reflects a pragmatic stance by the government acknowledging infrastructure constraints that continue to hinder EV adoption. Ms. Roy of Carriage also says that these proposals reflect a balanced approach by the government. She points out that hybrids not only get to retain their 2x VD factor, but also gain flex fuel incentives, which makes them highly cost effective. In all of this, we'll have to remember that EV adoption requires massive investments in infrastructure, charging networks, power grid upgrades, and much of this falls on the government. Hybrids, on the other hand, require minimal infrastructure but rely on private investment. And much as all of this is seen as being balanced on part of the government in terms of the short-term requirements of the country, here's the caveat. Says Ms. Roy, hybrids will help cut emissions in the short term, but they are not zero emission. The government will need to balance short-term practicality with long-term sustainability by quickening EV infrastructure development alongside hybrid adoption. This brings us to the nugget of information that we have for you in each episode. Did you know that the person credited with building the first self-propelled vehicle was Nicolas Joseph Cugnot, who in 1769 built a steam-powered road vehicle for the French army? And here's your quiz question for this week. Who is credited with the first automobile that ran on a petrol-powered internal combustion engine, which was a three-wheeler and was patented in 1886? And answer to the question from the last episode. What was the name of the architecture that was published by researchers from Google in a paper in 2017 And this architecture serves as the foundation for large language models used by Google itself as well as the likes of OpenAI. The answer is, the name of the architecture is the transformer model. That's all we have for you folks in this episode. If you enjoyed what you saw, do not forget to share, like, and subscribe. Until we meet again, have a wonderful time ahead.